Welcome to Right on the Edge. My name is Derek, and we're going to learn about fascism today. What is it? Where is it? Possibly even who is it? And we're going to find out in this video by how history works.
In some of the
There it is.
darkest periods of history, broadly misunderstood, and used as an insult directed at, well, just about anybody who might have a different political opinion.
Fascism.
Fascist.
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 Yeah, definitely one of the most used words in our political landscape currently.
She's a Marxist, communist, fascist, socialist.
You keep using the word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Yeah. There's a lot of ists going on, and they're all of them. Everyone I disagree with is also stupid. That's how it normally works, right?
Fascism is a word as misunderstood as it is misused. Now, these hyperbolic politicians could almost be forgiven for not really knowing what they are talking about, because nobody really knows what they're talking about. George Orwell once wrote, "The word fascism has no meaning except insofar as it signifies something not desirable."
And isn't he right? In the current, more right than ever before. Hey, buddy. Yeah. Also, I saw this picture before. I didn't realize it was Orwell. That's cool.
Ian Kershaw has dedicated his life to being one of the world's pre-eminent researchers on the social history of Germany in the 20th century. And even he said that defining fascism is like trying to staple jelly to the wall. A hard and fast definition never existed in the first place. And even if it did, it has changed over time from an idealistic but ultimately flawed movement coming out of a continent going through some radical change into what it is today, which is just a bad thing that we really shouldn't do again.
Well, that's good to know. Just don't do it, and you'll never have done a fascism. Yeah.
For most people, that may be all they need to know, but it does raise some uncomfortable questions, like, has fascism just been rebranded?
Oh, I think
One
so.
of the reasons why just recklessly throwing the fascist label on anything with even a hint of authority.
I think there's a problem with throwing a label on to something you dislike in general, whether it's fascism, racism, prejudicism, prejudicism. That doesn't really go in there, but just throwing a label on something, it waters it down and it makes that word meaningless over time if you overuse it. Like, words like this should be able to stand under their own weight. And when you say fascist, it shouldn't just be some idiot on the internet you disagree with. It should be somebody who's being a fascist, right? So that way the implication is immediate, like, hey, this is a possible danger, you know?
Is so dangerous is because for every characteristic that aligns with something like Nazi Germany or Mussolini's Italy, there will be a characteristic that doesn't. Just because something isn't strictly in line with the most prominent historical examples of fascism does not mean that it isn't fascism. And just because something isn't strictly fascism doesn't mean that it's safe. But okay then.
I mean, all those things are fair. Yeah.
What are some signs and symptoms you should ask your doctor about if you suspect you may have fascism developing in your country? And, well, if fascism really is so bad, why the f*** do Americans have Mussolini's universal symbol of fascism hanging up in front of Congress?
Oh, that's a good question. I didn't even realize that we did. Interesting.
In this day and age, if somebody calls you a fascist, that's probably not a good thing. But before some incidents in the mid-20th century,
I was going to say, in this story, it might not have been a good thing, but now it's just kind of like, oh, okay. That's nice. Well, what are you going to do about it, you know?
it was just a political movement like any other. Today, no serious political party would voluntarily brand themselves as fascists, but across Europe and North America back then, they were quite popular. In many ways, it was broadly considered less controversial than a lot of other types of politics at the time, especially socialist communism, which was also on the rise. Fascism was just branding. The Democrats aligned themselves with democracy, the Republicans with the Republic. Labour parties across the world use their name to signify their alignment with workers, and communist socialist parties with the ideas of socialism. So then, what about fascism?
Yeah, what was fascism? I mean, if this was such a popular movement, like what? How did it become? Wait, did we take the word and then misuse it?
The etymology of the word comes from the Latin fasces, which is simply a bundle of sticks. The idea is
That's crazy. So the idea of this movement is one of those like proverbs where it's like one stick will break, but many sticks will not break.
that a single stick is easy to
Oh
break,
my
but a
god,
bundle of sticks, all aligned with one another, is remarkably strong.
that's crazy. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, it seems to me like pretty good movement, I guess, sort of at the time.
This simple little metaphor goes all the way back to Rome, which used a fasces with an axe to signify the state's power to punish its subjects. These are
Damn.
the exact same symbols that are displayed in front of Congress. And if you look closely enough, on the legs of Abraham Lincoln's memorial. The bundle of sticks has been a cultural icon throughout history. It was everywhere because it was a powerful, tangible demonstration of the benefits of unity. Obviously, this was something that governments throughout history wanted to.
I mean, yeah, I imagine they'd want to encourage it. Like, united we're strong, and divided we are weak, right? They're just trying to get that point across all the time.
Encourage. Bundles of sticks for a long time were surprisingly important. They were the primary source of fuel for cooking and heat, so modern words stemming from them show up in more places than you might expect. Since this video is well and truly going to get demonetized anyway,
Oh yeah, it
a
is.
not so fun bonus fact for you is that the slur directed towards gay men also traces its origins back to these bundles of sticks as well.
Oh,
He's right. Individually, we are weak, like a single twig. But as a bundle, we form a mighty fat.
Anyway,
that's funny.
the point is that in 1919, when Benito Mussolini reformed the Fascismo, which would later go on to become the National Fascist Party of Italy, the word itself and its iconography didn't have the branding problem that it does today. The idea of strength through unity was appealing to a lot of people in Europe, which at the
I can see where this is going wrong now.
time was living through the aftermath of the Great War.
Yeah.
Long-standing empires had fallen, and in the power vacuum, a lot of ideas were being thrown around about the best way to reorganize society, to bring back some kind of perceived glory days. Outside of the title they had given themselves as fascists, there still wasn't any hard and fast defining characteristics of the movement, because one of the most important things you need to remember is that these guys were figuring it all out as well. There wasn't some seminal text on exactly what fascism was,
That's some good editing right there. Yeah.
like the Communist Manifesto was to, well, communism.
Yep.
Some point to the writings of Georges Sorel as the equivalent of a Marxist figure for fascism.
That makes
He wrote
sense.
a lot about individual service to a collective mission, but to be fair, his work also inspired
I think in a lot of ways we become, this is just a random tangent, but we become a little bit too individualistic. And because of that, we see the breakdown of our communities. And I see that as like a growing problem. Not that has anything to do with this guy specifically. It was just the stick symbol and that little line was making me think about it.
communists and even anarchists, so the fascists don't get to claim him exclusively. The definition would later emerge from their choices and how they handled power, rather than the choices being defined by a definitive idea. Before Mussolini formed the Fascist Party, he was actually a member of Italy's Socialist Party, and not a lowly member either. His writing skills let him climb the ranks and direct the publication of the party newspaper, significantly increasing its readership. But he
That makes
didn't
sense.
always see eye to eye with other leaders. Mussolini liked the idea of the masses being a revolutionary force to reset the national order, but he wasn't such a big fan of the other big ideas that came with socialism, mainly egalitarianism. Part of the reason why defining political ideologies can get so complicated is ironically because we try so hard to simplify them into neat little left-right spectrums. The socialists and the communists are identified as far-left ideologies, and the fascists as far-right. But what does that even mean? It just raises more questions.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit confusing in this case. Is it because like fascist by nature is more nationalistic? Um, and I guess the far left are more like economic, like he said, egalitarian, so more economic in their tyranny, or how does that work? Like, it's very interesting.
Then it answers, especially since, whether they would like to admit it or not, these two
I will say that not all leftists are aligned, and not all right-wing people are aligned, or rightists, whatever you call them, are aligned either. There's a lot of differences in these parties, like in different gradients.
groups have a lot in common. But politics is complicated and messy at the best of times, and the early 19th century was complicated and messy on top of that. Politics is the combination of multiple characteristics. So I present to you that a better way to think about this is to take inspiration from role-playing games. Every political ideology has a unique
There you go, role-playing game. That's a good way to put it, though. That's really good.
combination of stats, and it's up to you to decide which character you want to pick. Back in Italy, Mussolini was going to be presented with an opportunity to align his own skill points to build a movement from scratch.
Oh yeah, there you
After
go.
the start of the First World War, he was expelled from the Socialist Party because he supported the conflict as a catalyst to bring about revolutionary.
So in the end, he was like a revolutionary who thought this war could spur the change that he wanted to see. And even though he mostly aligned with the Socialist Party at the time, he also supported the war, which means they kicked him out. True to modern day standards. At least we haven't changed that much in 100 years almost.
Change. However, the party officially condemned the war as an intervention into another state's self-determination. Now,
We really have not changed that much from 100 years ago. That's wild. You see the same stuff being said today.
maybe he was just a bit salty about being kicked out of the club, but he would take some of the ideas of socialism, combine it with some other ideas from his favourite thinkers at the time, and use it to create a new type of politics.
I like the fact that they labeled it as ideal socialism. Equality number one.
Oh, and if you are currently furiously typing in the comments section about how wrong the characteristics of socialism are, congratulations! You have unlocked a new challenge in this whole game.
Yay!
How these political ideologies exist in theory was very often different to how they exist
Perfect. Not in theory, that's kind of how it should work. In practicality, that's never how it works.
in reality.
Yay.
Mussolini wasn't alone in figuring this all out. Across much of Europe and the rest of the world, there were similar people with similar ideas slowly gaining popularity.
I will say this, man. You can just tell by the size of that crowd, he wasn't an unpopular guy. Like, he might have been a bad guy, but he was very popular. He was a very good speech writer, and you can tell just by how engaged the crowd is.
Yes, including a certain
Yeah, yep, also a great public speaker. Undeniably a great public speaker. Like, if you listen to his speeches translated, they are some of the most compelling speeches like I've ever heard. And I am in no way aligned with being a Nazi at all. Like, not even a little bit. But his speeches were good, and they were intentionally deceptive, I think, compared to what he was actually doing, compared to what he said that he wanted to do.
failed artist. This background is very important because it clearly highlights two things. The first is that while the socialists and fascists eventually became sworn enemies of one another, a lot of their early membership had a lot of overlap brought together by the second important thing, which is that both of them were defined by the need for a new, powerful state brought about through revolutionary change. Where they differed was what would happen once they had achieved that change.
Yeah, this is where practical application to what they professed became apparent, and the differences therein.
So it's time to learn how history works, to find out what fascism
Wow, that's all a history. Dude, good setup, though. That was a lot of history to set that up, and I appreciate it.
really was, and why it's so widely misused as a generic insult. This video was made possible by Plord. Understanding history isn't just about dates and events.
We'll watch it because I think this is a great video. Don't worry. Support this guy's plot.
It's about noticing patterns and remembering the conversations that shaped them. When I'm doing research or watching long interviews, capturing insights in real time makes a huge difference. Claude builds intelligent audio tools that take the mental load off your plate, so you can focus on thinking, talking, and being present. The Claude
It's nice that they're trying.
Note is their sleekest recorder. It's the size of a credit card, lives right on your phone, and lets you capture meetings, calls, or interviews with a single press. It transcribes into 112 yours using the link in the description.
I said we'd watch it, but that was quite long.
One of the clearer defining features of fascism is how it handles individual equality. Liberal democracies like the United States were quite literally founded on the idea that all men are created equal. Now, again,
It's how we ended up freeing slaves. Or, the premise on which they used to free slaves as well is that all men are created equal, acknowledging them as men.
the idealistic notions of the founding fathers didn't always line up with reality. The abolition of slavery and women's suffrage took a while to get sorted out, but
Yeah, but eventually it was done, you know?
they had spirit. Even today, liberal democracies are clearly not always perfect, but they do at least strive to create a system where everybody has an equal opportunity to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Communists, in the idealized utopia that they were working towards, took this a step further. They generally acknowledged that people were not actually created equal and that different people would have different abilities and different needs. Equality was a desirable outcome to be worked towards, not an assumption. Fascism went the other way. People were not created equal, and it was unnatural to assume that they were or should be treated as such. People who were perceived as the fittest, best, and brightest should be elevated
I mean, they usually are by their own, like, actions, you know?
in society to where they could do the most good. Those who were weak should minimize how much of a drag they were on that greater good.
Alright, sorry about that. Puppies were being aggro.
This clearly has elements of Darwinism, whereby encouraging the elevation and survival of the fittest should make the herd, or the state, more competitive. Fascism
I think you could argue that point, you know? I think we could see where that's coming from. If you give these people who are our best and brightest more opportunities, then ideally we should be outcompeting people. I don't think that's in practicality how it works, but you could see like the logic that people would use to get there.
identified heavily with competitive sports, and also in more subtle ways, like elevating people who excelled in their professional discipline into positions of state leadership. In retrospect,
That's interesting. I'm glad they looked at that from different perspectives. Like in practicality, that makes sense. In actuality, it makes less sense.
this does seem to be at odds with the whole bundle of sticks metaphor. But according to fascism, some sticks
That's
are
the
bigger
sticks.
and stronger than others.
Yeah, there
And
you
a
go.
big bundle of big sticks was the solution to all of
Yeah, a big bundle of big sticks is even better than a little bundle of little sticks.
society's problems. I really hate to say it, but during the mid-19th century, fascists were kind of the original alpha bros. Everybody was assigned a rank and value
Wow. There you go, Hitler. The first and only time you've been labeled an alpha bro. Congratulations.
was determined on where they sat in that hierarchy. How societal rankings were tiered did vary regime by regime. In Nazi Germany, it was infamously based on a perceived master race at the top, and at
Yeah.
the bottom were the people holding society back. People who were either physically weak or disabled, people with subversive political leanings, or other races that were
People that didn't agree with them and people that they just didn't like.
enemies of the state. In Italy, how that rank was determined wasn't as direct as someone's race. There was still an emphasis on machismo, but Mussolini famously mocked Hitler's ideas about racial purity. One common group that was elevated in all of these regimes, though, was the youth. Young people are generally the most fit and able-bodied, which aligns with the vision of a strong, healthy state made up of
It's kind of interesting to hear this video and how many of these ideas we've taken forward with us to the current day and age. Like we put a emphasis on the youth. We tend to set people apart based on all these things are still here and present in society, and these thought leaders just like took these certain aspects and were trying to base their society off of them.
Strong, healthy people. It also probably didn't hurt that young people are generally more impressionable and agreeable with the idea that they are the best, and that society would be better if everybody else got out of the way to let them just do their thing.
That makes sense.
This messaging was especially appealing to young men, in particular those who felt like they had not achieved what they wanted in
Yeah, you'll find an audience. If you speak long enough, you'll find your audience.
life because certain elements in society were holding them back. This youthful trait was not so subtly exploited by groups of feeble old men who made up the leadership of these regimes. Now, to be fair, life for a lot of young people during the interwar period in Europe was not easy. Germany in particular was crippled by an unsustainable national debt in the form of war reparations, high youth unemployment, and inflation resetting savings. Achieving
Yeah, well, it's understandable why they were there, right? But if you ever wanted a country to bounce back and not just go down the same route, you probably shouldn't continue to cripple them under what is almost slavery or close to it. And obviously, Germany kind of brought this on themselves, but I'm still of the opinion that if you cripple people like that, you're just going to invite the same ideas to take back over, because then, you get people thinking like, well, maybe that was right, maybe this guy was right. We are being oppressed by this and held back by this, etc., etc.
life's milestones was almost impossible for young people. At the same time, the Weimar Republic was quite progressive in the fields of art, science, and social freedoms. This extended to things like women's rights and gay rights, as well as a very open culture toward new ideas that challenged tradition in profound ways.
That's interesting and not surprising. I'm sure there's like a lot of right-wing people would be like, I knew it, socialism equal gay.
Groups that had in the past been repressed were given opportunities they weren't before, occasionally displacing less deserving but
weird.
more entitled people in the process. For a lot of disenfranchised young people, it was an easier pill to swallow that these degenerate new elements had corrupted society and conspired to work against them.
That model looks like guy, bro.
So resetting the social order to how it ought to be should bring back prosperity to those most deserving of it.
Yeah.
When the counter-argument was a detailed analysis of global macroeconomic conditions and the acknowledgement that they had just lost the biggest war in history, the first guy's story sounded a lot easier.
I'm not going to say it's just that, but it's also the fact that they were paying for the sins of their fathers in a way that they probably thought wasn't fair. It's like, yeah, we went to war and we lost, but I didn't make that decision. That wasn't me, I'm sure a lot of people could resonate with that, and that's probably how a lot of these young men thought, because humans haven't changed that much in 100 years. And that's how I would think if I was being held accountable for the sins of my father and the actions of people that I never met, never knew, and whose thought processes weren't my own.
Easier to go along with. Naturally, this created a system where inequality wasn't just a byproduct of the system, it was the heart of it. Having someone to blame for all of the problems in the world is part of the reason why many consider fascism to be ultimately unsustainable.
Yep.
You eventually run out of people to blame at the bottom, so the masses' attention turns to the top. Now, it's important to emphasize that even the people at the top of this manufactured hierarchy weren't exactly living their best life. The philosophy behind elevating these people was not necessarily so that they could live a charmed life, it was so they could serve the state. Another core tenet of fascism is that the needs of the individual were always beneath the needs of the state.
I feel like a lot of countries still operate this way, just not as directly.
The state was seen as a truly exceptional entity, clearly superior to any other state in the world. For the people at the top of the hierarchy, that meant dedicated service, either militarily or in their profession. One of the only ways people could define themselves, or flex on their peers, was by service and recognition of the state. Even within the chosen people, rank.
Yeah, Yeah, so get recognized by, Big Daddy government, and you're doing a good job.
Was everything. For the people at the bottom, putting the needs of the state ahead of their own often just meant getting out of the way. Or, of course, much, much worse.
I was gonna say dying, moving, relocation, persecution, you name it. Like, whatever form this takes, the people at the bottom are always the ones that suffer.
For women, this duty to the state was arguably even more strict.
Yep.
Fascist regimes pushed for traditional gender roles to such an extreme that it often came at their own peril. The German war effort was at a significant disadvantage on the home front because they were hesitant to let women work in the factories like the Allied forces. For a while, the Germans could make up the difference with forced labour, but there were still some roles that could only be done by, well, let's just say, self-motivated workers.
Yeah, it's hard to. It was probably hard for them to preach to the masses that they need women to work after trying to artificially enforce normal gender roles, or traditional gender roles, is what I mean.
These ultra-traditional roles, combined with the idea that the fit, strong, chosen people should outbreed the less desirable elements of society, led to an
That's crazy. That's crazy. I forgot they did that. Yeah, the less desirable. So
almost obsessive focus on natalism. In Nazi Germany, monetary bonuses were given to families for having children. Women who had more than 4 children were awarded with the Cross of Honor of
holy crap, dude! They got military honor if they had four kids.
the German mother, a military-style decoration presented for service to the state.
Damn.
The male equivalent of being a good mother was being a good soldier.
There you go.
Militarism encompassed everything that fascism strived to be: aggressive, structured, hierarchical, and powerful. The military was a tool intertwined with the society, and it was something that leaders were very proud of, often taking direct control above and beyond the levels of a typical politician.
Well, that's if you're militaristic and revolutionary. Well, what's the last equation? Power, right? So the people at the top had the most power because they were the best of these best people,
Projecting military
supposedly.
strength onto other weaker states was seen as the natural order of things. So of course, the military was used liberally within the state to keep all the twigs in line.
Yep.
This is another place where comparisons to authoritarian communist states can become a little bit confusing.
Yeah, because they accomplish their goals in very similar ways.
In theory, Marxist-Leninist socialist states were not imperialistic. In fact, they were built on the idea that workers should rise up to overthrow their oppressors.
But then who's going to control or manage all these workers that need to be managed? Well, the person that convinced you to overthrow your oppressors. That's usually how it works in history.
And that it doesn't really work if they are the ones doing the oppressing. They still acknowledged that the military was a tool for defense, but it certainly wasn't meant to be an aggrandized feature of the state. In practice, authoritarian leaders of all flavors like the military because it's a tool for holding on to power.
Yep, they use it to maintain control, and if you indoctrinate people into the military in the way they do, people are less likely to rebel against the military because, well, hey, look at how, there's a lot of ways they do it, but it's more like, hey, look at this military, how great they are, and what good people they are, and what stand-up citizens they are. And there's a lot of that indoctrination in the world.
Fascist states just have it as a core tenet of their political philosophy, whereas this kind of stuff is technically out of line in an ideal communist nation. Of course,
there's never been an ideal communist nation, though.
The military couldn't handle every function of the state, which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle: the fascist economy. Using an extremely basic, but ultimately flawed, left-right political spectrum would suggest that political ideologies on the right should be pro-free markets and anti-government intervention in commerce. Fascism again shows why trying to simplify these things only...
I will say this, a lot of right-wing people don't consider fascism to be a far-right thing. They consider it to be a far-left thing due to the lack of economic freedom in these countries.
makes them
Whether that's right or wrong is besides the point. I just know the perspective, you know?
more confusing because nothing fits neatly.
Yeah.
Economic freedom in a fascist state is not as limited as it is in something like a communist nation. People, as long as they were the right people, could own businesses, save money, invest profits, and speculate to become rich and poor. As already mentioned, welfare was limited because only the strongest and smartest should survive. However, all of this was only allowed to happen if it did not interfere with the authority of the state.
That checks out, yeah. You can only do it as long as it's helping the state and not hurting it.
Company managers and owners of major industries were routinely stripped of their business so that control could be given to someone considered more worthy. In ideal circumstances, this was done so that something like an engineering firm could be managed
Wild,
by
man.
an
That's super
engineer
wild.
rather than a career businessman. In practice, it was often done to take assets from underclasses and give it to a well-connected party member. Adolf Rosenberger was a prominent financier who was also one of the original founders of both the Porsche company and the auto
Holy shit.
union, later known as Audi.
That is crazy. One of the founders of both.
After Hitler came to power, these firms were put under the control of engineers instead of financiers, which almost sounds good in theory, except
Except for the fact that the average engineer doesn't know anything about money or business. And you have to know that side of the equation.
that the true motivation was more likely because Rosenberg was a Jew.
Yeah, that's
Industrialists
true.
who did toe the party line were thoroughly integrated into the state and the military, often making their business indistinguishable from government organizations. Now, in the interest of fairness, the most historically significant fascist regimes spent most of their existence in a total war economy. Back then, even the Americans had a high level of government intervention in
Yeah.
private industry, with
I mean, we still do. But yeah, it was even worse then because they were in the middle of the war.
factories being commandeered for the war effort. But despite that, it was pretty clear that people had economic freedoms, in the sense that they were free to be rewarded by their leaders. So, if you happen to see the signs and symptoms of crony capitalism, reverence of militarism, strongman leadership, appeals to a young base that feels disenfranchised because they think major problems can only be solved by getting rid of
What it shows to me is that things haven't changed that much in 100 years. You can see all of these things in this video today. Now, thanks for coming with me on this journey to discover what actually is fascism. I didn't know that it was originally a political movement because it's been used so much and watered down so much. This was part of history that I knew nothing about. So thanks so much for joining me in this, and like and subscribe if you like this, and leave a comment if you would like me to react to something in the future. Had like a full brain dead attack right there, but hey, have a good night.